All right, well, welcome back to the channel. Today, I don't have a watch to restore, although there are plenty that I have lined up that probably could get a restoration, but I don't have any customer watches to work on at the moment, sort of in between. And so what I'd like to do is tackle an issue that I've seen on lots of different forums and on Facebook groups and other things that deal with what many of us would call a fake. And there are lots of questions about what that means. There's even questions about, why would I care if a watch is fake? And I'm not going to talk about that really in this video, but what I'd like to do is maybe provide some guidance to those who are interested in a vintage watch. So disclosure, of course, is important in the Seiko world to many of us, but there are lots of people that are selling on eBay and around. I mean, there are entire, Instagram accounts dedicated to identifying what are called fakes. And today I'm going to give you a little bit of perhaps what to look for, perhaps what to be sort of leery of, and why. Some of these watches, in particular, the Pandas and the Pogues and some of the other, the divers, of course, they're fetching, Rolex money in some sense. And so these watches are extremely valuable to many and have have an enormous influx of fake parts or aftermarket parts. I wouldn't necessarily say all of them are bad, but certainly they have some place in the watch world. However, I would say that if you're going to look for an original watch, if you're really interested in original, your job of being able to determine whether or not it is just from an eBay listing is getting harder and harder. And so I'm here to perhaps provide a little bit of guidance, and I'm going to try and make this fairly short. I'm already 2 minutes in, and I can tell this is going to be a long one. But I want to at least give you some sense. First thing I want to talk about is finding an original watch. What does that mean? Well, an original watch to me is a watch that was in my great uncle's desk drawer or sock drawer for most of its life. It was an old watch that they got perhaps when they were in Europe or Asia somewhere, or in the US, and they wore it for a number of years. It stopped working properly. It was just an old Seiko watch, and they got a quartz watch and threw it in a drawer and forgot about it. That's what that's a great thing to find. That kind of watch is something like this, for example. This is one of those types of watches. This is a very original 6105 diver. It is very original. It has not been restored. And it is a watch that I would say, has a particular patina that's nice to find. Well, let's see if we can get that to focus a little bit. And is very original. Original crystal, original everything, original crown. This is sort of, if you're starting by looking for a watch that hasn't been touched, this, or perhaps even this 6139 yellow dialed 6002 is also maybe what you would start to look for. Original clasp with lots of wear, nice patinaed crystal, but all the components are the ones it came with. So in a sense, this is a sort of watch that I would be looking for if I were to try and find one as a starting point. Now, you've probably heard this before if you watch any of these kinds of videos, but you look at the loom, the quality of the loom, you look at the hands and the form on the hands. There's lots and lots and lots of stuff to be wary of in this sort of situation. And I would say that, keeping track of what it looks like is a really tough job for those who don't perhaps have the experience that might come with tearing apart hundreds of these watches over the years. Here's another very original watch that hasn't been messed with. And what's interesting about this one is you can see this hand, for example, it's faded. It has faded out. And that's a good sign in a sense that it is an original watch. A faded hand usually means it's been worn quite a bit. They're supposed to be very, very orange, those hands, and they've gone to somewhat of a yellow. And then there are watches that are effectively new old stock. So here's one. This one's a bit of an enigma. The case itself is basically brand new. It has never been worn. For some reason, it is missing its center sweep hand. I don't know why. I bought this in a group of watches, but look at the case. I mean, that is completely new old stock. It's never been touched. But for some reason, it's missing a hand. Now, you could go out and go to eBay and buy a group of replacement hands, and I'll show you what they look like close up in a moment, and put one on here. But of course, you want to disclose, that's not the original Seiko hand, perhaps, that's been put on. So we're going to go through a couple different things. We're going to talk about hands and dials, try and do a little test here to see what the differences are, and maybe even talk about some diver hands as well. So let's get started. I also want to talk about bracelets a little bit, because bracelets are getting more and more true to the original. This is a replacement bracelet for a Panda. I mean, it is so good. The kind of quality. Look at that, Japan Z. Everything looks good, but it's brand new, but it's not Seiko. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to clear some of this out, and let's start with the dials. Okay, let's talk about dials for a minute. Now, I've got two Petri dishes here, one with new old stock dials and one with aftermarket dials. And I'm not going to tell you which one. I'm going to show you, and then you get to vote. Vote on the right, vote on the left. Of course, you can't give me feedback because this isn't live, but I'm going to take off the lids here, and I'm going to show you both sets. I'm going to start with the one on the right. Do a little close-up here, see if we can focus on this. Okay, so here are some dials. I'll try and get real close as my camera can get me. So take a look. You decide. There's the lume. Some writing. Okay, so that's that. Those are the ones on the right. Now let's take a look at the ones on this side. Okay, some lume, oops, some writing, there's some text. Looks pretty good. Look at the linening. Pattern on there, shiny markers. There's some text. Flat top A's. There you go. There's a good look at this one. There's the Seiko. Maybe a marker or two here. Look at the tops of the markers, maybe. Boy, that's hard to focus on, huh? There we go. Okay. So, you at home, what do you think? Which ones are the new ones, and which ones are the original ones? All right, well, I'm going to tell you. These are the aftermarkets, and these are the originals. So let's really look closely at two different dials. We're going to pull out the blue ones. Let's look at these. And I'll show you what the differences are. Hopefully you have spotted them, but it's tough. I mean, you get a blurry photo on eBay, you might end up with $1,000 watch that has $40 worth of components. Okay, so I'm going to try and zoom as much as I can, as well as I can. Let's take a close look. let's take a really close look at both of these dials. Okay, so what we said was the resist text one was the aftermarket. This one is the original. So, easiest way to tell, of course, is look at the back. Seiko put a mark, 3.7. This is from 73, July of 1973. That's when that dial was produced. The back of this dial, now this isn't the only thing. Nothing. But it looks okay. I mean, you know, it's not the same, but it's, how would you know? Other than perhaps looking at that. So if you're actually opening the watch, yeah, you'll know immediately. But there are other ways to tell. One is the loom. So let's see if we can get this to look a little bit better. So you see how the loom on this one is a bit shiny? Let me see if I can do this in a slightly better way. See how that loom is a bit on the shiny side? This is a bit on the grainy side. The grainy loom, the more sugary loom, is the original. This one just sort of looks too smooth. It's not quite right. The biggest tell is the text. So look at the gap between Japan 6139. Now Japan's got a flat A. That's, you know, that's remarkably detailed. Sometimes they're just a straight A. But look at the distance between 6139 and Japan. Look at it here. See the gap? It's bigger. Otherwise, you can look at the Seiko marker. It's just flatter. The indices, now on a watch that really looks good, those markers should be bright, shiny, flat, and high polish. Now this is a little dusty, but you can see the high polish on there. Same with the Seiko. The S in the Seiko is not quite the same. The text of the font is just not quite there. Everything else, though, is pretty remarkable. Now there are some more telltale signs on the yellow dials, so we're going to put these back to where they should go. All right. Let's put you with yours. You with yours. All right. Let's look at yellow dials. Now, the one thing you can immediately see in the yellows is you see, okay, so the spacing there is not correct. Look at, it looks like a phonograph dial in the sub-register. All right, so you see the grooves. They're not as pronounced. They're more of a moire pattern where you get this interference in the gold. Again, the sugary loom, high polish on the markers. Here the loom is more, I would say, plastic looking and no high polish on the markers, a bit more sandblasted. How about the Suas? Boy, that Sua is pretty good on the aftermarket by comparison. So, although they are very similar, there are some things that you can perhaps discern. The other thing about dials is really what it comes down to the Panda. The Panda is perhaps one of the more faked models of watch. I don't have a fake Panda dial, but I do have a lot of original ones. And so what I'm going to point out here are a few things you want to look for on the Panda dials. One is the loom. This is an original watch, 100% original. Has not been messed with or fooled with. Probably one of the nicer ones I own. The A's are always flat. Now, the remake Pandas, for some reason they've got the A's peaked, and that may change. The other thing is the coloring. color of this compared to this. You know, this is a dark green and not a black in the subs. This is kind of a different kind of gray than the rest. The markers themselves, they should be really sharp and very, very distinct with very small non-green lume dots at the ends. Now let's take a close look at hands. Hands are another thing that are easy to sort of point out, but are getting harder and harder to tell. Look at the top of this hand. You see how it's smooth across the top? The way they riveted the tube to the hand left no discernible mark, no peak in that top of that hand. So there's nothing there. There is a good shot that says that the tube is connected to the hand. Very, very small. There's a hole, but there's not a rivet. Let's look at an aftermarket sweep hand. You see that rivet? Right in the middle of the hand? Let's see if I can get that back into focus here. Right there. There's a rivet that the tube is attached to the hand with. Now, that also goes for the sub hands. Sorry for all the movement here. But it's getting harder. You can see that is a little painted over, but it's starting to look like it's an original one, but it's a little sloppy. So on a real original hand, I'll point one out here if I can find one. Oh, I had it. There's a yellow one. You see how nice and round that rivet is, and it's not painted? It's metallic. There's one. Perhaps you can see it, that red one there. See how nice that rivet is? And it's metal in the center. Those are some new old stock hands. But let's look, for example, at some original 6105 hands. So here's an original set. And here are some originals. Now, what I want to point out is the shape of this hand. So here's a long sweep from a 1972. Let's do a short sweep here. It's just okay, yeah. All right, so here's a short sweep. You see the shape of this? See how there's no peak at the end? The newer hands, the new hands, have a sharp point. These are rounded. And the shape of this end should be very thin and not rounded at the edges. It should be really thin and not rounded. It's harder to tell with the actual hour and minutes, but that's what you're looking for. And all of these have that. There's a long sweep. You can tell it's got this very sharp, very distinct shape and no point at the end. And it's sort of, the taper stops here, and then it's almost widthwise symmetric about the length of the tail to about here. So the width of the hand is very symmetric. So that's one way to tell on a diver. And here's, let's go back to the original diver. These all have a long sweep. This is a 8000. And you can just tell. It's got that non-pointed look, and it's sometimes hard to tell through an old crystal. But if you see this really non-blobby, and that should be a nice pink and not red, non-blobby hands, very flat finish. That's the way it should look. I want to end on bracelets. So bracelets are, of course, very popular on watches like this. So let's look at the Panda one more time. Let's look at that end link real quick. So here's an end link. This is a specific kind of bracelet that was on the Pandas. It has a number, as most Seiko things do. This is a Z027 bracelet. And let's look at what it says. All stainless steel, Japan Z. Okay? And look at the finishing on this. It's a bright polish. It's got scratches, of course, because it's old. Now let's look at a reproduction. Still in the plastic. Look at that. All stainless steel, Japan Z. Boy, that looks really good, in fact. Really, really accurate. Okay, where is this one? Can I get it? All stainless steel, Japan Z. Whew. I'd be hard pressed to distinguish these two. Look, even the shapes of the arrows and the links. Man, I mean, they've done their homework, which makes it harder for you and me. I mean, geez, that's tough. They did a good job. So the one telltale on these is the finishing. Unless somebody has polished it, you can tell this has a linear brush, top to bottom, a brush finish. Okay? But the font is different. Let's look at the font. So this is a big Z027. Can you see the difference? It's getting closer. It's not quite there though. The Z027 on the original is big, much taller, fills this up. With the other one, the aftermarket, it's subtle though. You're gonna have a hard time if you're not used to it. Let me show you one other thing. This is my very own personal Panda. This is the watch I wear. Okay. Now, when I got this watch, it was a project. It was in pieces, and you know, I cobbled it together the best I could so that I could have one for myself. I had a bracelet of parts, basically a clasp and some links and some things, and I cobbled everything together the best I could for my own personal watch. I usually sell better watches in a sense, but I didn't have any end links. I didn't have any end links for it. And, you know, I wanted my end links to look like original end links. So I took a set of these, brushed finished, and I polished off the brushing. Oh my gosh, sacrilege. But look, the 027 is small. On my own watch. Now, I'm not going to sell this watch. I love this watch. If I ever find an original set of end links, yeah, I'll put them on. But at the end of the day, I just made it harder. If I wanted to be unscrupulous, it just made it harder for the next person. Because if you can tell me there's a distinction between these two that's more apparent than this one, I would not be convinced that you were able to distinguish those two versus this one. So, be careful out there. Enjoy your watches. Hey, if you don't care and you're okay with having a watch that, you know, a collector perhaps wouldn't value, yeah, go for it. If it's cheap, maybe you want to have replacement parts. But there are lots who are there to deceive, and please be careful. You know, these watches are going well over $1,000, well over $2,000 for these watches. These, in fact, and the divers. You know, I didn't even get into turtles and all the other variants that are out there. But you can really get tricked and feel terrible if you're really into an original watch. Buy one from somebody you know. Okay. Thanks very much for watching.